Hello, everyone. Today we're going to look at another horrific situation with you. In most situations, addiction is not a life sentence, and many former alcoholics, for example, conquer their addiction, return to normal life, raise families, and assist others facing similar challenges in overcoming the crisis. This is how the narrative of a young woman named Nicole Pitts began, and she appeared to have a promising future. The investigation into this tough case lasted 6 years before the prime suspect in the murder was brought to trial, and another year was required to prove his guilt in court and sentence the criminal to prison for as long as possible. At first appearance, this crime appeared to be meticulously planned and executed, and the culprit himself led a full life for many years, convinced that he would never be prosecuted. But it was the little things and facts that helped to piece the puzzle together after years of inquiry. Now, let's try to make sense of this confusing scenario from the start. Who is Nicole Pitts? Nicole Pitts was born in King County, Washington on February 26, 1973. She was her parents' only common child, and their marriage ended while she was still in high school. Nicole grew up to be an energetic and social child who participated in sports and was known for her charm. She always had a large group of pals. She enjoyed travels to the countryside, and her favorite destination was Lake Sammamish, which is located east of Seattle and where she spent her summer vacations each year. After graduating from high school, the girl enrolled in Washington College's public relations program. Nicole continued to actively participate in sports, remained in fantastic physical shape, and chose to transform her pastime into a source of income. She took a position as a trainer at a local sports club, where she rapidly earned the admiration of her colleagues, as well as frequent clients who eagerly attended group courses in which Nicole was an instructor. Pitts opted to further her study in management while also working for a prominent mobile communications firm. Outwardly, she was always polite, sociable, and willing to assist at any time, but nearly no one realized how much anguish and misery lay beneath a veneer of apparent well-being, destructive addiction. Nicole was a teenager when her parents divorced, and she went through a difficult time. Nicole began to hide from issues by filling them with booze, which was a big shock to a fragile and unformed brain. All of this resulted in a terrible addiction that lasted several years and severely harmed Nicole's physical and emotional health. Nicole's mother, Gail, worked as a stewardess and was virtually always away from home due to her hectic work schedule. Thus, she was unaware that something was amiss with her only daughter. The kid lived with an old grandmother who was unaware that her granddaughter drank alcohol on a regular basis. When the reality was exposed, alcohol addiction had already caused irreversible damage. Nicole was assisted in dealing with the matter by her mother, Gail, with whom she has always been quite close despite everything. She not only sent her daughter to therapy, but also accompanied her to AA sessions, which helped her open up and fight her alcohol cravings. Gail had already remarried, and her new partner, Rod, was sympathetic. He supported her stepdaughter in every way, loved her as if she were his own daughter, and felt she could overcome her addiction. Nicole handled therapy responsibly, attended every meeting, and rapidly overcame her addiction. As previously stated, Nicole's health suffered as a result of her alcohol consumption. She suffered major pancreatic problems that required surgery. But, worst of all, alcohol addiction at such a young age interfered with the body's reproductive functions, preventing Pitts from having children. Nicole met her future husband, David, in the mid-1990s after overcoming addiction and returning to a sober life. She had recently started working at a sports club, and David was a frequent visitor there. Nicole was immediately drawn to a tall, beautiful young man who was meticulous about his training. In turn, he noticed the lovely coach and became interested in her. True, David was 4 years younger than Nicole, but their age difference didn't bother them. They soon began a sexual connection that lasted nearly 8 years before marrying in 2002. They planned a magnificent but modest wedding ceremony in Hawaii, inviting only their closest friends and family. Following the wedding, the newlyweds relocated to the tranquil town of Linwood, Washington State, where they purchased their own home and gradually settled in. Nicole was a very outgoing and charming young woman. She rapidly made friends and formed positive ties with all of her neighbors. She simply loves animals and owned several pets. Because she was unable to have children, she devoted all of her mother love to her dogs. According to neighbors' memories, David and Nicole appeared to be the perfect married pair. They were nearly inseparable, frequently walking their dogs together and beaming with joy. Nicole loved to cook and was quite good at it. She spoiled her husband with exquisite home, cooked meals, and enjoyed surprising their guests with her culinary skills. Nicole went missing in 2006, just a few days before her 33rd birthday. On that day, she missed the Aya Society meeting for the first time, despite being the group's leader and inspiration, since this had never happened before. The other members of the group assumed she had cracked after nearly 9 years of recovery. Pips also did not show up for work that day, which concerned her co-workers, and in the evening, Gail sounded the alarm because she had been unable to contact her daughter all day, which had never occurred before. She called David to find out what had occurred, but he too was unable to contact his wife. According to her husband, he and Nicole had a quarrel the day before, so when he tried to call her the next day and she didn't respond, he figured she was still upset with him. For this reason, David did not go hunting for her straight away, instead waiting until the evening to ask his wife for forgiveness. When Nicole did not return home in the evening and her phone remained unanswered, the family decided to contact the police, but their application was not immediately accepted. The missing person was an adult, and it had been less than a day since her absence, so the police indicated there was no reason to be concerned. As a result, the search did not begin until the evening of the second day, because Nicole never showed up and her phone was unreachable. The authorities chose to begin the search where Nicole was last seen, especially at her and David's home. However, no evidence or anything odd could be located that would indicate Pitts had been kidnapped or that something had been done to her in that room. Furthermore, Pitts was missing, along with her own vehicle, implying that she had simply left and opted not to return. The initial story evolved from this, in which the young woman wanted to leave her husband or teach him a lesson after a family disagreement, causing him to worry. Nicole's buddies from an alcohol addiction support group provided the voiceover for the second version. They believed Nicole could have cracked after years of abstinence and recovery. This idea was supported by the fact that she had recently been taking heavy painkillers prescribed to her due to a back ailment and pain. Nicole frequently surpassed her recommended dosage and may have shifted from medication to booze. The third version was the worst of all options. Nicole did not return or provide any information about herself because she was no longer alive. However, the missing person's family remained skeptical and hoped for the best. Her mother and stepfather did not wait for the police to arrive, but instead began their own search. They appealed to all concerned individuals via social media, requesting assistance in the search and sharing any pertinent information on the location of their daughter. They also took the first flight to Linwood, where they launched their own hunt for their daughter, posting flyers with images of her and asking everyone who knew her. The police looked not only for Nicole, but also for her automobile, attempting to determine which route it had taken on that tragic day. However, the longer the search, the less likely it became that Nicole would be found alive. A few days later, a man going for a morning jog found across the body of a young woman in one of the nearby park areas, confirming his worst fears. That day, he chose to take a shortcut through an undesirable and neglected neighborhood, rather as his usual route. He observed something weird in the shrubbery and approached it, only to find a brutally disfigured, naked female body. The police were quickly informed of the horrific discovery, and the criminalists who came on the site speculated that the crime may have entailed violence because the body of a young woman was naked. There was no doubt that it was a murder, and based on the number of bruises, abrasions, and bruising, the victim had been badly beaten before. The cause of death was asphyxiation. Nicole was strangled using her bare hands. The image was extremely horrible. Investigators assumed that the major motive of the crime was theft because the victim's car had yet to be recovered. However, the assailant chose to eliminate a witness, and because she was a young woman, she may have been abused. The police instantly concluded that the body recovered belonged to Nicole Pitts, who had vanished a few days prior and was being looked for around the city. but her family had yet to identify her. When Gail saw her daughter's body in the morgue, she lost consciousness. The mother needed medical assistance. Her husband, Rod, was also grieving, but many people found the widowed spouse's attitude unusual. David did not appear depressed at all, and his feelings were rather fabricated. However, no one paid any notice because everyone experiences tragedy differently. While the search for the automobile was ongoing, the police felt that the car was the attacker's primary goal, and the police felt that the car was the attacker's primary goal. And that traces of the killer should be found inside. Information on the missing car was released to the media, with a request that anyone who sees it immediately contact the hotline. The car was discovered only a few weeks later at a parking lot on the city's outskirts. The security on duty spotted the unassuming gray Volkswagen Polo because it hadn't been taken away in a long time, but he had no idea it was implicated in a murder investigation. The police promptly took the car for a thorough investigation and the required competence. It was expected that they would be able to find evidence and vital clues that would aid in the identification of the culprit, as well as the restoration of the crime scene. However, the detectives were extremely dissatisfied. Absolutely nothing could be found in the car. There was no blood, traces of fighting, or evidence that the automobile owner had been transported anyplace by force. Only Nicole and her husband, who drove the vehicle on occasion, left fingerprints and DNA evidence in the cabin. Nonetheless, the detectives were not in a hurry to return the automobile to David, since they believed the evidence was present. It simply did not appear on the surface. The sole undisputed truth was that the young woman was killed with extreme cruelty, but the motive for the crime was absolutely unknown. The hijacking story suddenly appeared implausible because the automobile was abandoned practically quickly on the other side of the city and showed no evidence of fighting inside. The second obvious motive was violence. However, this supposition was not supported. Experts determined that the dead had no sexual encounters, voluntary or forced, at least a day prior to the incident. But the question of why she was naked remained unanswered. The third explanation was that the attacker had a personal motive or strong negative feelings toward the victim. In support of this view, multiple injuries were inflicted as if in a fit of wrath. Nicole, on the other hand, was pleasant and gregarious, wanting to serve everyone around her. She had no adversaries or ill will against anyone. This complex case had every potential of remaining unresolved because, after nearly a year, the inquiry has yielded no fresh leads or directions for the search for the offender. No one saw the code or who abandoned the car in the parking lot because the area was not crowded and there were no surveillance cameras. But what was odd was that the person driving the car was much taller and larger than the victim, as evidenced by the driver's seat position. Suspicious was also the fact that the case was classified as secret, and information about the investigation's progress, as well as new facts and evidence discovered, was not provided to the victim's relatives. That is, the mother, stepfather, and spouse were not aware of the situation. They only received piecemeal information, such as Nicole's bank card being used at a specific gas station in the country following her disappearance. The police sought the footage from the video cameras there, but what they discovered remained a mystery. Nicole's parents, discouraged by the lack of findings and the fact that their daughter's killer remained at large, decided to launch their own independent inquiry. To accomplish this, they engaged a private detective to gather all of the information and confirm some of their ideas, and they offered a $10,000 reward to anyone who could provide any relevant information on the issue. The reward was eventually up to $35,000, but it still did not help advance the case. David was only interested in the investigation for the first 6 months, after which he progressively withdrew, ceased contact with his mother-in-law and father-in-law, and eventually remarried and had an heir. Gail was devastated by the news that her daughter would be unable to have children, and David continually chastised his wife over it. The bereaved mother constantly hinted that the perpetrator could be her son-in-law, but many assumed that she was expressing resentment, and the police did not appear to examine such a scenario at all. An unexpected twist in the case occurred 6 years after the crime, when it was reported that David had been arrested as the major suspect. Most individuals who followed the inquiry were taken aback by the turn of events, but Nicole's family and friends had suspected him from the start and freely discussed it. Throughout the many years of research, they appeared to be disappointed in justice. Yet justice had been served. David, who had moved away and lost contact with his first wife's family by that point, was dismayed when the handcuffs were fastened over his wrists, since he assumed the case had been closed and no one was hunting for the criminal. He strongly denied his guilt and even volunteered to take a lie detector test, which he completely failed. As it turned out, the police suspected David as well, but they lacked firm evidence establishing his guilt, and they did not want to intimidate the criminal and force him to hide. So, for all these years, the detectives were preoccupied with gathering evidence to prove that the perpetrator merited punishment. David presumably believed he had committed the perfect crime and that no one would ever pursue him. However, the crime contained a number of anomalies, each of which needed to be investigated. Let's start with the CCTV footage from the same petrol station where someone paid using Nicole's card. The tape clearly indicated that the card was used by a man who resembled David, but it was impossible to identify him because of his headpiece and thick glasses. Despite the fact that this tape could not be regarded unassailable evidence, it was retained in the case file. The second anomaly was Nicole's lack of a wedding ring, without which she never left the house. Everyone assumed the jewelry had been stolen by a criminal, but during a check of the victim's home, the ring was discovered in a box on the dressing table. Furthermore, during the body investigation, specialist criminalists discovered a specific dental mouthguard in Nicole's mouth, which she used during sleep to prevent bruxism, or teeth grinding. Nicole had been administered this device soon before the disaster because she was having uncontrollable spasms of her masticatory muscles, caused by anxiousness, which resulted in enamel erosion and tooth chipping. This discovery prompted the investigators to think that the woman was murdered in her own bed while still sleeping. This explained her absence of clothing, as well as the fact that her body was clean and showed no signs of resistance. Nicole's face was also free of cosmetics, which she always applied with care before leaving the house. David could simply forget about the mouthguard because his wife only recently started using it. Furthermore, experts examined and evaluated the location of the driver's seat in the discovered car, discovering that the anthropometric data of the last person who sat behind the wheel matched that of the murdered's husband. Furthermore, as previously stated, only David and Nicole's fingerprints were located in the car. If a third person had been present in the cabin, his traces would have been discovered, and if he deleted them, so would the traces and prints of the car's owners. Another significant discovery was made as a result of rapid technological advancements. In an attempt to confound the investigation following his crime, the culprit repeatedly used the victim's phone in different areas of the city, yet at the same locations, and at the same time, there was a signal from David's phone. As it turned out, David had a purpose as well, and a significant crisis had been long overdue in this picture. Perfect family. While Nicole was studying hard, doing 2 jobs and assisting others with addiction, her husband lived a sedentary existence. He seldom stayed at a job for long, preferring to spend time in pubs and clubs where he wasted his wife's money on alcohol and other women. As a result, the family experienced major financial difficulties, which only intensified over time. Nicole attempted to encourage her husband to change his views, to stop partying, and to begin attending AA meetings where he might help him live with addiction. But in answer, David only laughed, calling his wife boring and convoluted. It was also revealed that David not only methodically cheated on his wife with different random girlfriends, but also constantly invited her to join them. Nicole consistently invited her to join them. Nicole consistently refused, and her husband once tried to force her to do it by getting her intoxicated. Gail was aware of all the horrors going on in her daughter's family and tempted to persuade her to leave her husband, but she refused since she loved him and hoped David would change. Following Nicole's strange death, her husband hastened to collect a huge insurance payout and quickly began a new romance. It turned out that a few months before the catastrophe, David, who had previously been unfaithful, had an affair with a girl named Jane. He spent time with her at pubs and clubs when his wife was at work or studying. Shortly before Nicole's birthday, he brought his mistress straight home, where they were apprehended by the suddenly returned Nicole. It was this condition that sparked the family fight. Nicole informed her mother, with whom she was extremely close, about the incident and then abruptly vanished a few days later. Because Gail was aware of everything going on, she suspected her son-in-law from the start. However, the police argued that the evidence acquired was insufficient to send the man to jail. The case was then classified, and the family ceased receiving updates on the inquiry, and the parents eventually gave up hope that the perpetrator would be punished. By the way, when David received a large insurance settlement after his wife died, he spent everything with Jane. Gail suspected that David's lover could have been an accomplice or inspirer of the crime, but she was only called in as a witness because no evidence of her involvement was discovered during the investigation. David appeared in court in September 2013, but he continued to emphatically deny any participation in the disaster. His defense counsel first claimed that all of the evidence against him was circumstantial and could not be used to prove his guilt. When it became clear that there were too many incriminating factors, the defense altered tactics, attempting to make David appear like a victim. The account of Nicole's pain pills after her back injury was told, and the lawyers attempted to persuade the court that Nicole snapped and began drinking again, making her husband's life unpleasant. But first and foremost, such assertions were untrue, as proven by everyone who knew Nicole. Second, even if she had snapped, David had no right to kill his wife, especially in such a terrible manner. The defendant's guilt was eventually confirmed, and he received the maximum penalty permissible under the rules of the state in which the case was heard. David served an 18-year prison sentence. In 2025, however, he will be eligible for parole after serving 2/3 of his sentence. Thank you for watching, people. Subscribe to the channel. There are more startling stories ahead of you.